All right, let's get started. Comrade John Thorne, the author's lawyer. So this is George Jackson's lawyer. I've just finished rereading Angela's analysis of fascism. She is brilliant, quote, big, beautiful, revolutionary woman. Ain't she? I've studied our letters on the subject carefully. It could be productive for the three of us to get together at once and subject the whole question to the detailed historical analysis. There are some differences of opinion and interpretations of history between us, but basically, I think we are brought together on a principal point by the fact that the three of us could not meet without probably causing World War III. Give her my deepest and warmest love and ask her to review these comments. This is not all that I have. This is not all that I will have to say on the subject. I'll constantly return to myself and re-examine. I expect I will have to carry this on for another couple hundred pages. Well, we'll deal with the question as they come up, but for now, this should provoke both of you to push me on to a greater effort. The basis of Angela's analysis is tied into several odd left notions that are at least open to some questions now. It is my view that out of the economic crisis of the last Great Depression, fascism, corporatism did indeed emerge, developed and consolidate itself into its most advanced form here in America. In the process, socialist consciousness suffered some very severe setbacks. Unlike Angela, I do not believe that this realization leads to the defeatist view of history. An understanding of the reality of our situation is essential to the success of the future revolutionizing activity. You want me to keep going?
I was confused because I thought it was a half page.
Okay, I'll read this one.
Late.
I'll read this one.
Okay.
To contend that corporatism has emerged and advanced is not to say that it has triumphed. We are not defeated. Fear fascism, absolutely totalitarianism is not possible. Hierarchies has had 6,000 years of trial. It will never succeed for long in any form. Fascism and its historical significance is the point of my life, of my whole philosophy on politics and its extension war. My opinion is that we are at the historical climax, the flashpoint of the totalitarian period. The analysis is in depth, yet to be done. Important as they are, both William Reich and Franz Neumann's work on the subject are limited. So let's go down here. This is the mass psychology of fascism by Robert Reich. Behemoth, the structure of practice of national socialism by Franz Neumann. So they were just telling us the thing. Okay, cool. Reich tends to be over analytical to the point of idealism. I don't think Neumann truly sensed the importance of the anti-socialist movement. Behemoth is too narrowly based on the experience of German National Socialism. So there is so much to be done on the subject and time is running out. If I am correct, we will soon be forced into the same fight that the old left avoided. This one says the sixth month, 20th day, 71. It is not defeatist. It's not defeatist to acknowledge that we have lost a battle. How else can we, quote, regroup and even think to carry on the fight? At the center of the revolutionary is realism. To call one or two or a dozen setbacks defeat is to overlook the ebbing flowing process of revolution, coming closer to our calculations and then recording, but never standing still.
Receding.
Thank you.
If a thing isn't building, it must be decaying. As one force emerges, the opposite force must yield. As one advances, the other must retreat. There is a very significant difference between retreat and defeat. I am not saying that our parents were defeated when I contend that fascist corporativism emerged and advanced in the US. At the same time, it was making its advance. It caused, by its very nature, an advance in worldwide socialist consciousness. Quote, when U.S. capitalism reached the stage of imperialism, the Western great powers had already divided among themselves almost all the important markets in the world. At the end of World War II, when the other imperialist powers had been weakened, the U.S. became the most powerful and richest imperialist power. Meanwhile, the world situation was no longer the same. The balance of forces between imperialism and the socialist camps had fundamentally changed. Imperialism no longer ruled over the world, nor did it play a decisive role in the development of the world situation. There's a name there that I couldn't pronounce.
Quan Nguyen Gap? I don't know.
In my analysis, I know it's Vietnamese. The name is originally Vietnamese, and it's Nguyen is what it's actually pronounced. It's pronounced Nguyen, but
Quan Nguyen Gap.
Vo Nguyen Giap.
There you go. You did it.
In my analysis, I'm simply taking into account the fact that the forces of reaction and counter-revolution were allowed to localize themselves and radiate their energy here in the U.S. The process has created the economic, political, and spiritual vortex of capitalism's last reform.
No, stop. It says political and cultural vortex, no spiritual.
Okay, sorry. The process has created the economic, political, and cultural vortex of capitalism's last reform. My views correspond with those of all the developing world revolutionaries, and if taken in the international sense, they are aggressive and realistic.
The second notion that stands in the way of our understanding of fascist corporatism is the semantic problem. When I am being interviewed by a number of the old guard and point to the concrete and steel, the tiny electronic listening device concealed in the vent, the phalanx of goons peeping in on us and in at us ceases. His barely functional plastic tape recorder that cost me a week's labor. Point out that these are all manifestations of fascism. He will invariably attempt to refute me by defining fascism simply as an economic geopolitical affair where only one political party is allowed to exist above ground and no opposition political activity is allowed. But extreme that definition of totalitarianism.
Examine.
Thank you. No opposition parties are allowed in China, Cuba, North Korea, or North Vietnam. Such a narrow definition condemns the model revolutionary societies of totalitarianism. Despite the presence of political parties, there is only one legal politics in the US, the politics of corporatism. The hierarchy commands all state power. There are thousands of ways, however, to attack it and place that power in the hands of the people. Another thing, 620:71. All levels of struggle must be conceived as inclined plans leading I can't say it. Inexorably to the point where armed conflict will engulf two or more sections of the people. Armed struggle or organized violence is the natural outcome of sequence of historical events that have matured to the point of impasse.
This is not to say that war is for us the only immediate recourse or the spontaneous result of a breakdown in lesser forms of political activity. I have always tried to emphasize that through every stage of political mobilization, there must be a corresponding and equal military mobilization of the people's forces. One is inextricably tied into the other, and not simply for the reason unwittingly put forward by the old guard that fascism allows for no valid oppositional political activity. Though there is some truth in that position, my position is based on historical precedents that indicate the probable scope and range of violence in an American revolution. In the present class structure, we represent the group with the greatest revolutionary potential. We are Black people, the significance of which needs very little analysis here, though I will go into the mechanics of race at length later in dealing with the contextual structure of fascist hierarchy. But mainly my position is rooted in the long history of the American business oligarchy's penchant for violent repression of any forces that have threatened its centrist movement, and in the very natural defense.
It's centralist. I think you said centrist.
Centralist movement. Okay, that might be why I'm struggling. I don't know. And in the very natural defense reflexes, that sentence doesn't make any sense. And in the very natural defense reflexes of any form of state power. That sentence doesn't make sense. Although, as victims of one of history's most brutal contradictions, as the poorest of the poor, as Black people, it is quite justifiable and completely possible for us to destroy this country as a modern nation state, to attack it with a totally destructive countersweep of frustrated retaliatory rage that is not our purpose. As revolutionaries, it is our objective to move ourselves and the people into actions that will culminate in the seizure of state power.
All right.
I'll let you know when I get back. I have to step away.
Oh, you do? All right. The centralist movement would mean that they have centralization and they move as one. Huh. All right. Our real purpose is to redeem not merely ourselves, but the whole nation and the whole community of nations from colonial community economic repression. The U.S. has established itself as a moral enemy of the people's government. All scientific socialist mobilization of consciousness everywhere on the globe, all anti-imperialist activity on earth. The history of this country is, in the last 50 years and more, the very nature of all its fundamental elements and its economic, social, political, and military mobilization distinguish it as a prototype of an international fascist counter-revolution. The U.S. is the Korean problem, the Vietnamese problem, the problem of the Congo, Angola, Mozambique, the Middle East, which is West Asia. It's the Greece in the British and Latin American guns that operate against the masses of common people. 6/21/71. That's a date, by the way. The nature of fascism, its characteristics and properties have been in dispute ever since it was first identified as a distinct phenomenon growing out of Italy's state-supported and developed industries in 1922. Whole libraries have been written around the subject. There have been 100, quote, party lines, end quote, on just exactly what fascism is. But both Marxists and non-Marxists agree on at least two of its general factors: its capitalist orientation and its anti-labor, anti-class nature. These two factors almost by themselves identify the U.S. as a fascist corporative state, because that's the universality, and I guess that's the one common thread. An exact definition of fascism concerns me because it will help us identify our enemies and isolate the targets of revolution. Further, it should help us to understand the workings of the enemy's methodology. Settling this question of whether or not a mature fascism has developed will finally clear away some of the fog in our liberation efforts. This will help us to broaden the effort. We will not succeed until we fully accept the fact that the enemy is aware, determined, disguised, totalitarian, and merciless counter-revolutionaries. To fight effectively, we must be aware of the fact that the enemy is consolidated through reformist machination, the greatest community of self-interest that has ever existed. Our insistence on military action, defensive and retaliatory, has nothing to do with romanticism or perceptuous idealistic fervor.
Precipitous.
Got it. We want to be effective. We want to live. Our history teaches us that the successful liberation struggle requires an armed people, a whole people, actively participating in the struggle of their liberty. The final definition of fascism is still open, simply because it is still a developing movement. We have already discussed the defeats, the defects of trying to analyze a movement outside of its process and its subsequent relationship. You, again, only a discolored glimpse of a dead past. No one will fully comprehend the historical implication and strategies of fascism, corporatism, except the true fascist manipulators or the researchers who are able to slash through the smoke screens and disguises of fascist setup. Fascism was a product of class struggle. It is an obvious extension of capitalism, a higher form of the old struggle. Capitalism, versus socialism.
I think our failure to clearly isolate and define it may have something to do with our insistence on a full definition. In other words, looking for exactly identical symptoms from nation to nation. We have been consistently misled by fascism's nationalistic trappings. We have failed to understand its basically international character. In fact, it has followed international socialism all around the globe. One of the most definite characteristics of fascism is its international quality. 6/22/71. The trends toward monopoly capital began effectively just after the close of the Civil War in America. Prior to its emergence, bourgeois democratic rule could be said to have been the predominant political force inside American society. As monopoly capital matured, the role of the old bourgeois democracy faded in process. As monopoly capital forced out the small, dispersed factory setup, the new corporativism assumed political supremacy. Monopoly capital can in no way be interpreted as an extension of old bourgeois democracy. The forces of monopoly capital swept across the Western world in the first half of this century, but they did not exist alone. Their opposite force was also at work, i.e., international socialism, Lenin's and Fanon's national wars of liberation guided not by the national bourgeois, but by the people, the ordinary working class people. At its core, fascism is an economic rearrangement. It is international capitalism's response to the challenge of international scientific socialism.
It developed from nation to nation out of the differing levels of traditionalist capitalism, dilapidation. The common feature of all instances of fascism is the opposition of a weak socialist revolution. When the fascist arrangement begins to emerge in any of the independent nation states, it does not so by default. It does so by default. It is simply an arrangement of an established capitalist economy and attempt to renew, perpetuate, and legitimize that economy's rulers by circumflexing and weighing down, disguising a revolutionary consciousness, pushing from below. Diffusing, sorry. Fascism must be seen as a episodically logical stage of socio-economic development of capitalism in a state of crisis. It is the result of a revolutionary thrust that has weakened and miscarried a consciousness that was compromised. Quote, when revolution fails, it is the fault of the vanguard party, end quote. It is clear that class struggle is an ingredient of fascism. It follows that where fascism emerged and develops, the anti-capitalist forces were weaker than the traditionalist forces. This weakness will become even more pronounced as fascism develops. The ultimate aim of fascism is the complete destruction of all revolutionary consciousness. Our purpose, 6/23/71. These are all dates. Our purpose here is to understand the essence of this living, moving thing, so that we will understand how to move against it. This observer is convinced that fascism not only exists in the USA, but has risen out of the ruins of a once eroded, dying capitalism, phoenix-like. It is to its most advanced and logical arrangement. So again, we're talking about fascism and what it looks like.
One has to understand that the fascist arrangement tolerates the existence of no valid revolutionary activity. It has programmed into its very nature a massive, complex, and automatic defense mechanism for all our old methods for raising the consciousness of a politically revolutionary class of people. Potentially revolutionary class of people. The essence of a USA totalitarian socio-political capitalism is concealed behind the illusion of a mass participatory society. We must rip away its mask. Then the debate can end, and we can enter a new phase of struggle based on the development of an armed revolutionary culture that will triumph. On May 14, 1787, the Constitutional Convention, with George Washington presiding officer, the work of framing the new nation's constitution, proceeded with 55 persons, and only 2 were not employers. There have been many booms and busts in the history of capitalism in this nation and across the Western Hemisphere since its formation. The accepted method of pulling the stricken economy out of its of its stupor has always been to expand. It was pretty clear from the outset that the surplus value factor eventually leads to a point in the business cycle when the existing implementation of the productive factors makes it impossible for the larger factor of production, labor, to buy back the, quote, fruits of its labor. This leads to what has been erroneously termed, quote, overproduction. It is, in fact, underconsumption. The remedy has always been to expand, to search out new markets and new sources of cheaper raw materials to recharge the economy. The imperialist syndrome.
Conflicts of interest develop, of course, between the various Western nations and eventually lead to competition for these markets. The result is always an ever-increasing international centralization of the various capitalist elites, worldwide cartels, international telegraphic unions, now international telecommunication unions, universal postal unions, transportation, agriculture, and scientific syndicates. Before World War I, there were 45 or 50 such international syndicates, not counting the purely business cartels. The international quality of capitalism is not happenstance. It is clearly in the interest of the ruling class to expand and unite. I am one Marxist-Leninist Maoist Fananist who does not completely accept the idea that the old capitalist competitive wars for colonial markets were actually willed by the various rulers of each nation, even though such wars stimulated their local economies and made it possible to promote nationalism among the lower classes. War, taken to the point of diminishing returns, weakenings rather than strengthens the participants. And if the rulers of these nations were anything at all, they were good businessmen. Expansions, then, which often led unavoidably to war, was the traditional recourse in the solving of problems and created by a vacuous, uncontrollable system, which never considered any change in its arrangement, its essential dynamics, until it came under a very real, directly threatening challenge from below of its very existence. Fascism in its earlier stages is an arrangement of capitalist implementation in response to a sharpening. I'm going to read the rest. Threatening, but
I was going to read this page and the next page.
Okay, but weaker egalitarian socialist consciousness.
In regional or national economic crisis, the traditional remedies also include measures which stop just short of massive expansion on the international level. Traditional controls short of expansion and war have always existed in the form of government intervention, tariffs, public expenditure, government export subsidy, and limited control of the capital market and import licenses. And monopolies have always used government to help direct investment. Do you want to say anything about that chapter or just keep going?
No, it's a good chapter. It needs to be re-examined and people should examine it. Because fascism does exactly what they said.
Classes at war. Mobilization and contra-mobilization. Enough time has passed now since the emergence of fascism, the extreme crisis that precipitated it, and the hostilities that caused its early development, to view it with less of the coloring that sensationalism and war propaganda necessarily create. We should now be able, after time has somewhat dulled the traumatic exchanges of debate and struggle to analyze fascism objectively, its antecedents, its prime characteristics, and its goals. In denying its ideological importance, I am not suggesting that all of its advocates of the especially early period were opportunist or deranged individuals reacting to a personal threat to their own situation within the society. A great many of the early fascist intellectuals were responding to a very real social situation.
As intelligentsias, keepers of the particular nation's systems of value, art forms, and political thought, they felt it as their responsibility to attempt to resolve a growing social problem. My insistence upon the non-importance of ideology indeed rests squarely upon this point, that most of the fascist intellectuals were reacting to the uprootedness of social disintegration of a particular moment, and with each change in the face of this state of affairs, there were a large part forced to repudiate most of their former ideology. Weight is given to this observation by the fact that early fascism, including the I can't say the word.
I would assume it's amalgam, but I think we need to look that one up.
Amalgam. A mixture or a blend. Amalgam of expressions of expressionists, anarcho-syndicalists, futurists, Hegelian idealists, theoretical syndicalists, nationalists, and, in the case of the Spanish phalanx, intellectual anarchists. The whole theme of this early phase of fascism was not merely anti-communist, but fundamentally at a general indictment of decadence, bourgeoisie decadence. Fascism also absorbed some socialists. In 1914, the Fasci di Azzoni revolutionary formed itself out of the group of super-nationalist patriots favoring Italian intervention in the war against the Central Powers. Benito Mussolini, a leader of the extreme syndicalist faction of the Socialist Party, supported them vehemently in his newspaper, El Popolo d'Italiano. And of course, this resulted in his expulsion from the party in March 1919 after a deep disillusionment and unrest caused by the Italian participation in the war. Mussolini formed the first real fascio. I think that's Italian for fascism. The intellectuals that supported him did not do so out of the sense of a usual role of the intellectuals in society, i.e. to educate, to set the values of that society in a time of extreme social disintegration and economic crisis.
Men like Benedetto Croce and Arturo Toscanini, and others like Giovanni Gentile and Gabriele D'Annunzio, one of Italy's greatest poets, supported Mussolini almost out of desperation at what they felt to be a destructive national breakdown. All four were elitist and may have also felt that their status as intellectuals was also threatened. Recall, the Russian Revolution had shocked the world to its foundations about this time. The general disregard of the Socialist Party for any art form or scientific activity that did not serve the state, and its tendency to fractionalize and procrastinate alienated many of the nation's top intellectuals. But the final reason why the importance of ideology and fascism must be denied is the fact that it exists in more than one form. In fact, historically, it has proved to have three different faces. One, quote, out of power, that tends almost to be revolutionary and subversive, anti-capitalist and anti-socialist. One, quote, in power but not secure. This is the sensational aspect of fascism that we see on screen and read of in pulp novels, when the ruling class, through its instrumental regime, is able to suppress the vanguard party of the people's and workers' movement. The third phase of fascism exists when it is, quote, in power and securely so. During this phase, some dissent may even be allowed. In Italy, Trilussa, the poet, wrote and published more bitter and bitter satires attacking the political regime that can be found in any of the so-called liberal democratic states. In April 1925, 3 years after the fascist march on Rome, Benedetto Croce was able to publish a clearly anti-fascist manifesto. I think I'm done reading. My throat is killing me.
Oh, no worries. The finished product, the actual fascist arrangement, is diametrically opposed to its original ideology. The regime turns openly traditionalist and unintelligent, like Mussolini, receive the favor or compliments of other unintelligent people like President Roosevelt, Bernard Shaw, DuPont, Kennedy, and H.G. Wells. This stems from an inevitable conflict between the nation of a new spiritualistic man and the theory of ethical state. The ideas of obedience and creativity, authority and freedom are so contradictory to each other, so mutually exclusive, that the ideology of fascism could never be taken seriously. The pseudo-intellectual origins of fascism can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece. The German National Socialist apologist Alfred Baumler, the expressionist Gottfried Benn, both recognized Hegel, as did some of the Italian intellectuals and Eastern European fascists. The Western Europeans, however, favored the primitive withdrawal ideas of Nietzsche's, or a confused combination of Nietzsche's and Hegel with a bit of Plato's philosophy. King added for window dressing. Actually, there have been many different fascist ideals and arrangements, as there have been fascist societies, which brings us to the relevant point of inquiry. The importance or form of a particular political regime can never be understood simply as it stands alone. Its social and economic past must be investigated and clearly defined before the distinctive being of the political realm takes shape. It isn't until the mid-19th century that Germany and Italy reached the nation-state status. Their heavy and industrial sectors were rapidly expanding and coming into conflict with traditionalist economic sectors. Though there were some clashes of interest within extended family of the ruling classes at the point of their emergency into Western bourgeoisie culture, the section controlling the largest share of the GNP in all cases finally succeeded in gaining an even greater hold over the direction of the economy with class interests generally working a compromise. Welcome back. Yeah, we're reading a little bit about fascism, trying to understand it. All right. The final result always involves a higher degree of centralization of power and control in terms of positive mobilization. It occurs when the capitalist industrial sectors of the particular society succeeds in altering the pre-existing equilibrium in its favor. The period in question was characterized by the movement of masses from the traditional agricultural sectors into the sweatshops, large and medium, of the cities. The policy was designed by the capitalist class to limit the range of choices of the newly mobilized masses. But, quote, the specter of communism, end quote, was, quote, haunting Europe. The working masses began to organize and exert increasing influences in the realm of politics. This we will term positive mobilization. So the three-sided political struggle opened the 20th century. Actually, it was a two-sided struggle, the proletarian against the ruling class. A multitude of conflicts existed within the ruling class, particularly between the older traditionalist sectors and the manufacturing classes. See, he's proving that even the ruling class, they sit there and fight amongst each other. Thank you. Within these two factions, there were a number of separate interest groups. The corporative idea had its root in this conflict. Elitists, conservative economists like Pareto theorized around such concepts as, quote, governing elites and, quote, general equilibrium, end quote. The object of course, was to diffuse the positive mobilization of the working class. The system itself was ostensibly designed to balance the interests of all economic classes and substructural groups. Sorry. However, in fact, its principal purpose was to check the growth of the vanguard party's influence on the working class. In its beginning, especially in Italy, it was too vague and difficult to control. General equilibrium was never reached, and class struggle went on unabated. Class consciousness sharpened, and the old bourgeoisie democratic state tore from within, and in conflict with each other, rushed towards their own ruin. There is another form of mass mobilization that has strong socioeconomic significance. It lies between positive and contra-positive mobilization. It involves the men who were uprooted to serve the nation-state's wars. Those who were recruited from the agricultural sectors generally gravitated to the cities after their release, further dislocating the economy in favor of the modern sector. The traditional agricultural sectors were forced to mechanize, modernize, and pull menial land out of production. Marginal land out of production. In some areas, agriculture collapsed altogether. The result was the need to import foodstuffs and other agricultural products. This may or may not have damaged the overall economy, but in any case, it represented another faction turned over to the modern sector. After World War I, international capitalism went through an expansion phase of the business cycle, and its base were regenerative effects of the war of capitalist production and speculation. But the boom was brief. The Great War had taken the whole businesses of destruction and surplus to the point of diminishing returns. The year the years 1920 and 1925 were spent in recession and depression across the Western world. A few years that followed, from 1925 to 1929, business, quote, roared back to recovery and expansion. Industrial manufacturing around the Western world and part of the developing world, Japan, Argentina, Brazil, increased by 25%. The volume of world trade increased accordingly. However, an increase in the arts of agriculture production under the strain to modernize without a corresponding increase in the ability of the great laboring masses to buy back what was being produced. Participated a sharp fall. Is that right? Precipitated. Yeah. A sharp fall in the price, structural, and foodstuffs in one of the world's largest agricultural centers, the United States. It was underconsumption, not overproduction, and it led to the fatal stock market crash of 1929. The whole Western world went into recession and deep depression. Two countries were little affected by the general breakdown. Russia, which had taken itself off the wheel with a successful socialist revolution, and Italy, which had established a strong economic centralization that tended to close her economy off from the other bourgeoisie states. Italy had already established fascism shortly after World War I, during the 1920s to 25 economic crisis. The war had mobilized millions of Italians, most of whom were uprooted from over traditionalist sectors of the proletariat. They had gone through the changes that most other Western countries were about to adopt. The key element that made the economic policies of fascist arrangements unique as the emphasis on, quote, reform through governmental intervention, end quote. The opposite of Adam Smith's, quote, invisible hand, end quote, working to coordinate economic activity. The opposite of the French Revolutionary battle cry, quote, laissez-faire, end quote. Big businesses was in a crisis, of course, after a short boom following World War I. The giant cartels and the national industrial and financial monopolies were starved to the bone in both periods of fascist arrangement, the earlier 20s and all of the 30s. This gave the movement its seemingly middle-class antecedents, where large-scale manufacturing was not in complete control. Its straining to emerge as a dominant force within the economy was resisted by the petite bourgeoisie, the landed classes, and the medium proprietors. Here we see fascism in its out of power, quote, one stage, end quote. Here we hear its language sounding deceptively anti-capitalist, quote, parasitic capitalism, end quote, illegitimate capital, quote unquote, rapacious capital, quote unquote, etc., etc. This was true in Italy and with early fascism in, oh my gosh, Falangist Spain and in Germany. Mussolini, who set up the first successful fascist regime, was a man trained all of his life in the revolutionary tactics and strategies of scientific socialism. He departed from the international socialist movement, dated from the moment he gave his unreasonable support to a nation-state war in which the working class of one or more nations was manipulated into the murder of the working class of other nations by the ruling classes of the respective states. Because no rich man, no ruling class individual is going to be on the front lines fighting this. Workers are doing this. People to exploit other workers. They're putting other workers, fighting other workers. His opposition to socialism and his participation in a reformist capitalism were no doubt due to the factionalism and basically reformist attitude of the Socialist Party, in spite of the fact that the Socialists won 156 seats in the chamber of the elections of 1919, over 50% more than the next largest political party, the Catholic Popular Party, had won majority in the councils of 2,202 communes and 26 provinces, where there were 8,507 communes and 69 provinces. In general administration elections of the following year, and in spite of the fact that the Socialist General Confederation of Labor had grown from 300,000 members before World War I to almost 2.5 million members in 1920. The Socialists still seem powerless to solve the nation's economic problems with the promised revolution. In 1920, the Socialist Party seized control of all the nation's steel manufacturing plants, but incredibly returned them to the private interests. Go figure. Several accounts claim that the workers couldn't run the plants. But if the makers of steel cannot make steel, obviously it was the problem of direction and management of the Vanguard Party. There were strikes, slowdowns, lockouts, and the kinds of disorder that preceded revolution or counter-revolution. In the years following the war and during the early depression of 1920 to 25, Italy could have gone either socialist or fascist. There were partisans enough in both parties to lead the uprooted, disintegrating society into a new direction. The difference was in the nature of the leadership, along with the question of who would be willing to commit their whole fortunes and futures to the battle. Mussolini took his black shirts army and moved to the fight, killing and suppressing his opposition for the interests of an alarmed industrial traditionalist elite. He was well educated in the science of positive mobilization, which made him a natural architect of a contra-positive mobilization intended to diffuse the working class movement. He seized power, quote unquote, in 1922 with the full support of the northern industrialists, the petite bourgeoisie, and the older traditionalist agrarian interests. In 1921 election left his party with only 35 seats out of the possible 535 in the parliamentary body, but by applying violence judiciously and scientifically, as he had learned from Lenin, he was able to force the abdication of the king and the constitutional monarchy and form the first political regime representing the new direction of capitalist development. Quote, I write, end quote. He pumped bullets into the old left and new life into capitalism. The people were to exist solely for the state, the ruling class. This was the very antithesis of socialism. This period marked the second phase, quote unquote, of fascism. Quote, the dark night, end quote. When it was still insecure, but it went on to develop a, quote, closed economy, which directed investments in public works projects. It proceeded to fill the economic vacuum with surplus capital and supranationalism. Quote, believing, fight, obey. State-protected industries, mainly in munitions and shipbuilding. Italy extended her power faculties, and opened new marginal agricultural land for its new slaves, new educational facilities, and new quote-unquote educators. Out of 1,250 university professors, only 12 refused to take the academics' oath of loyalty to the regime in 1931. There were also part of the reforms. Taken all together, the reforms turned out to be extreme reaction. Going over the history of this is really good. Just looking back, making sure. All right. The government of 1870 had seized the Papal State. The regime brought back the old religion. In 1929, in spite of the unrewarding experiences of World War I, the regime was allowed to make war again in Africa, in Europe. This marked the, quote, third phase of fascism, in power and secure. The point here is that fascism emerged out of the weakness of the pre-existing economic arrangement and in the old left. And the weakness must be assigned to the vanguard party, not the people. The People's Party failed to direct the masses properly with positive suppression of their class enemies and their goons. Mussolini was able to proclaim that fascism held the only solution to the people's problem by default. Fascism, the new arrangement, the rearrangement, the strengthening of reforming and laissez-faire competitive capitalism was anti-socialist from its inception. It attempted to conceal the reality of class struggle by distinguishing itself as a new solution to, quote, national problems, end quote, by defying the interests of the, quote, whole state, which turned out to be in the interest only of the state's ruling class. Fascism is always a response to a threat to the establishment. Any anti-establishment action taken by the strictly political arm of the forming fascist arrangement are simply attempts to centralize or upstage the capitalist industrial sectors, either to establish it, as in Spain, or modernize it, as in those cases where marginal productive interests are absorbed or destroyed by the arrangement. It is significant to note that no fascist regime, quote, in power, end quote, have advocated the abolition of any form of private ownership. The fascist regime and private ownership work hand in hand. No modern political regime can exist for long without the cooperation of those who control the means of production. The shock troops of fascism on the mass political level are drawn from members of the lower middle class who feel the upward thrust of the lower classes more acutely. These classes feel that any dislocation of the present economy resulting from the upward thrust of the masses would affect their status first. White aristocracy, the so-called middle class, and petite bourgeoisie within the United States. They are joined by the sector of the working class. Hold on a second. Come on. There we go. Of the working class, which is backward enough to be affected by the nationalistic trappings of the loyalty syndrome that sociologists have termed the, quote, authoritarian personality, end quote. One primary aim of the fascist arrangement is to extend the development this new pig class to degenerate and diffuse working class consciousness with a psychosocial appeal to man's herd instincts. Development of exploitation and the authoritarian syndrome is the center of the totalitarian capitalist fascism. It feeds on the small but still false sense of class consciousness and the need for community. The collective spirit of fascism is morbid phenomenon that grows out of the pathology of mob behavior. With each development in fascist arrangement, the marriage between the political elite and the economic elite becomes more apparent. The integration of the various sectors of the total economic elite becomes more pronounced. The Romanian Iron Curtain, right? The Romanon. Hold on. Let me make sure. Romanian. I'm going to make sure. I don't want to misrepresent something here. I'm going to make sure. Hold on. Umanian. Iron Guard. What is the Romanian? I don't know if that's Romanian. Iron Guard. I don't want flag. Hold on. I'm trying to spell, everybody. I'm just slow at it. There we go. What is this? Iron Guard. What is it? Iron Guard political party. The Iron Guard was a Romanon. It's Roman. I can't spell it. Romanian militant revolutionary religious fascist movement and political party founded in 1927 by Cornelius Zeli Corderi, I can't say it, as the Legion of the Archangel Michael, or the Legionnaire movement. Why do they always use like strict like Christian fucking ideology? Jesus fucking Christ. That's why Christian nationalism is a form of fascism. Oh my gosh. It was strong, anti-democratic, anti-communist, and anti-Semitic. And it has a checkerboard thing. Like it's weird. So I don't know if this is like part of like something we should look out for, but it shows that right there. So I don't know. Maybe that's a sign to look after. I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. So, all right. No exception. It would have eventually bedded down with the, quote, owners and the financiers, end quote, and the integrated the arcane. I can't say this word. I know it's an easy word. Watch, I'm gonna not like myself after I say this word. I think I know what it means.
Archaic.
Yeah, that's right. Archaic sectors of the traditionalist capitalist elites with the modern sector had it not encountered the Red Army. We're doing good on time. The generals and the colonels of the various Latin American fascist regimes were attempting to positive mobilization. And I'm gonna look up what positive mobilization is. I'm gonna see what that means. Hold on, right back. Hello. All right, back. Oh my God. No. I'm gonna have to go back. Contra mobilization is likely to compound search for two separate contra is a term that has distinct meanings of no establishment, single definition. Oh my gosh. So it says there's a lot. Let's see here. Oh, it's a study guide. Hey, look, I found a study guide, everybody, to this book. From the Liberation School. Awesome. Never thought I'd know that. I can't.
Did you really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Just look up contra positive mobilization meaning. And you'll find it. At least I did. All right. The term contra mobilization is not a standard now I'm saying it's a medical or a scientific term. The phrase appears to be a misinterpretation and conflate. of two different concepts distinct. Okay. All right. I don't know. Contradiction. Maybe it's the contradiction positive mobile. I don't know. Does anybody in the comments I'm going to read this. Make sure to see if anybody else maybe said this. Anybody? No, no one else. Thank you. The generals and colonels of the various Latin American fascist regimes are attempting contra-positive mobilization and functioning as an instrument to balance the interests of the traditionalists with the more modern sectors of the neo-colonial nations. It is very misleading to regard them as the quote-unquote ruling class of such nations, or to consider them a part of the populistic movement, as the Romanian and the Romanian, that RUMANIA and Spain state intervention simply serves the best interest of the diminishing capitalist ruling class by restructuring it and destroying the people's labor movement. I wonder if the United States ever does that. Huh. Everything he's saying is what fucking United States does. Can I repeat the question? I don't know. What question did I forgot the question already. I'm so sorry. I forgot the question. Capitalist political regimes cannot exist of their own. Without the support of government, capitalism simply could not prevail. Peron was a fascist. The peace he worked out between the labor and the owners was subtle and distinguished, but nonetheless fascist in that it appeased and diffused the workers' resentment of the non-workers and effected a quite efficient counter-positive mobilization. Peron maintained an apparent popular appeal throughout his years as head of state because of the Vanguard Party's willingness to settle for reformism and tokens in a less than junior partnership relationship with capital. His arrangement of the fascist state was indeed singular. So it's important that as the Vanguard system, as a communist party, as communists, to not do capitulationism, to not capitulate and coexist. Like, hello, like we don't do that. We take this shit out. Okay, like the USA, the original structure of the society of the society in which he had to work his scientific manipulation had only one available sector, large enough to uproot enough without strong left direction to carry his movement, labor. Peron, the fascist, found his strongest support in labor. He was finally deposed when he lost the favor of the economic elites. At heart, all fascist manipulators are elitists and revere private ownership. They are backward and reactionary to the ultimate extreme of self-destruction. Peron might have held on to his position had he chosen to serve the labor class honestly and make it a genuine power based for the society, one which truly embraced their interest by nationalizing the productive facilities and turning them over to the labor management. But fascists would rather die or flee than support a total revolution. So they must be slain. Love it. The very first step in establishing the, quote, whole interest of the state, end quote, the corporate state, is to dismantle the working class movement and replace it either with a state-controlled organ or no organization at all. The corporate law passes. See, and I think that's what our fucking our labor unions are, filled with fascists, to not go full throttle and to seek liberation for the workers and the laborers. The corporate laws passed in Italy in 1934 served only to sanction the complete destruction of the proletarian movement. United States! Jesus Christ. At the same time, they set up the automatic defense mechanism against future labor activities. United States. In disputes, labor was, hold on. In disputes, labor was represented by men sworn either to the state or without the skill and intelligence to affect labor demands. Do you see that parallel to what we have here? The manufacturing class had long since literally married into the regime. In Italy, the fascist party cadre spread throughout the nation, organizing people left aimless by the failure of the positive mobilization of the Socialist Vanguard Party. People who had dropped out, defected, people who became uprooted and unemployed either by war or the deflated economy. This organizing must be considered contra-positive mobilization in that its intent was to inflate the capitalist economy and deflate the worker and interest government sponsorship of public works projects. Fascism in Italy, Germany, and Japan succeeded in reconstructing capitalist productivity, institutions, and traditional property relations. After the takeover, Italy recovered rapidly from the 1920 to 1925 post-war depression. The ordinary complexities created in inflammatory budgeting did not immediately manifest themselves because of the pre-existing state of the economy. The untapped productive factors, capital and labor, were grinding to a standstill. Cost of living and cost of production under those circumstances did not immediately rise to the point of crisis. Diminishing returns of capital decreased in real wages and labor. Later, both Italy, 1925 to 26, and in Germany, 1937 and 38, this inflammatory budgeting showed damaging trends that set off a chain reaction in Germany that may have eventually led to its downfall. However, the heart of fascist economy is an attempt at controlling through centralization, monopoly capital control, price fixing, wage freezing, and carefully balanced foreign trade. Gee, I wonder if that's the United States. The first currency crisis, stimulated by Italy's inflationary policies initiated in 1925, resulted in the destabilizing of the lira by decree in 1927, LIRA. A controlled deflammatory period followed, affected through the banking system, which the regime influenced by decree or advice. Private interests protected themselves from total destructive competition by using the regime as referee. After the Great Depression, the international rise of fascist states by default refinements in its simple currency controlled methods were introduced. The replacement of competition with corporations among the private interests became more standardized. How are we doing? We're doing good. Let me look at standardized. Let me look at forward. Ooh, this is a long one. We'll see where I'm at. All right, let's go. The Germans realized the inflammatory currency control would have little real effect on the expansion of heavy industry without also controlling the capital market. Directions of investment was also a key factor in the arrangement. Again, the regime functioned as a centralized mitigating influence. Real wages began to fall. Industrial production rose. Considered against the gross national product, investment rose 25% by 1937 in Germany. The same 25% figure held true for Japan in the middle of the late 30s. From 15% in the gross, I think it's the gross national product, GNP, at the lowest point of the Great Depression in fascist Italy. Annual average investments in industry rose to 19 to 20% in the years 1936 to 40 because Italian fascism was already established when the entire Western capital market banking system failed. There was a sizable amount of quasi-government ownership. The, quote, Industrial Reconstruction Institute, end quote, established by the regime, was quite simply a financial institution, a huge bank. It also indirectly owned or influenced large sectors of nation's heavy industry, a further hint at the upward thrust of the middle classes to fill the sections of the traditional ruling class destroyed by the forces of the business cycle. In general, the development of an experiment in controlled capitalism resulted in a concentration of economic power in the large monopolies. The crisis in German foreign exchange murdered the small businessmen. Small agricultural units tended to disappear because of low wages, low consumptions, and large increase in the arts of agricultural production. The necessity for government intervention increased as the interests of the private elites generated new intentions. The breaking down of the big industrial pattern into sections, the regulations or elimination of real competition, except, of course, for labor when it was short, and the control of labor organizations basically compromised the whole of the new fascist, quote, economic arrangement, which attempted to reduce the vast strata of classes and class interests of the pre-existing state of the economy to just two principal classes, the haves and the have-nots. The psychosocial dimensions of fascism become quite complex, but they can be simplified by thinking of them as part of a collective bargaining process carried on between all the elites of the particular state, with the regime acting as arbitrators. The regime's interests are subject to those of the ruling class. Labor is a partner in this arrangement. At the head of any labor organization in the fascist state, there is an elite which is tied to the interests of the regime. Consequently tied also to the economic status quo. The trappings of this pseudo-mass society are empty, cheap, spectacular leisure sports, parades, where the strangers meet, shout each other down, and often trample each other to death on the way home. Mass consumptions of worthless super suds of aspirins, ritualistic, ultra-nationalistic events on days to glorify the unintelligent who died at the war, or other days to deify those who sent them out to die. A mass society that is actually a mass jungle. At its core, fascism is capitalistic and capitalism is international. Beneath its nationalist ideological trappings, fascism is always ultimately an international movement. Many of the fascist regimes that failed or lacked thrust, the Belgium, oh my gosh, re-exit, I can't say this word. The Bulgarian, I think it's Belgian, that's Belgium. No, that's not Belgium. That's Belgon. Oh my gosh, I can't say this word. What is this word? I like it. I get all ready to go and I can't say a word. R-E-X-I-S-T. What is this? How do you say this word? Oh my gosh, it won't let me say it. Re-exist. Okay, it's Belgian fascist political party active in 1934 and 45. Okay. Oh, it's in Latin America, I think. Okay. I think so. The Dutch NSB, National Socialist Movement, Japan's arrangement, Romanon Iron Guard, were all essentially to oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't do this. Hold on, sorry everybody again. I get a word and I've said it before, but when I look at it, it's like, wait, the M and the I is messing with me. And I'm going to hear it and be like, imitative and flexible. Even the totalitarians must be, oh my gosh, must be oh my gosh, another word. It's a simple word too. Oh my gosh. Supple. All right, let me read this. Even the totalitarians must be supple and responsive. For supple means bending and moving easily and gracefully, flexible. Supple and responsive if they are to survive. Peronism was imitative as was the Brazilian, oh my gosh, intelligentsia. I think that's it. They were emulating their colonial masters in the USA. So one fascist regime falls to another, more efficient fascist regime. Two factors must be seriously considered when analyzing the two largest fascist states in Latin America, Brazil and Argentina. Their dependence on foreign trade and their neo-colonial status, which involves independence on foreign investment, quote unquote. Even exports fall as they did during the depression of the 30s. The value of the national currency must also fall, and it follows that imports automatically decrease. The battle to balance payments begins, necessitating massive governmental intervention, which leads extraordinarily to inflammatory domestic economic policies. Oh my gosh. Inflation. Oh my gosh, I can't say the damn word. I am struggling with this word. Inflationary. I think it's inflationary since I'm now saying it out loud.
Inflationary.
Yeah, the characteristics by trends to cause monetary inflation. Okay. To the inflationary domestic economic policies and sometimes to conduct of conflict of interest with the ruling class of the parent nation. Concern for balance of payments determines internal economic motives. The deficient financing and the attempts to control incomes by controlling labor, price fixing, government stockpile of agriculture surpluses, positive direction of investments, and the balancing of the interests of the dualistic economy elites can all be pointed to the evidence of an attempt to employ the centralist controls that characterize the classic fascist arrangement. The first fascist regime of Brazil was headed by Vargas. It lasted from 1930 to 1945. 15 years. 15 years. Coffee exports from 70% of the national's GNP prior to Vargas' takeover and the Depression. When the international trade, especially in agricultural goods, collapsed, Vargas was forced to attempt experiments with the so-called closed economy. New internal markets had to be created. Investments and motive relocated, industrialization attempted. But all of this planning, though successful to an extent, was still basically, oh my gosh, imitative, and did not accurately reflect the realities of the nation's inability to accumulate capital. Okay, hold on, let me see here. 1, 2. Oh my gosh, there's so much more to go. All right. I think it is extremely important not to confuse the three faces. Okay, I think that's a good stopping point. I'm going to stop there. So much to do. So much to learn. So much things that happen. So much. But I think I'm going to stop there for the day. Done a lot today. A lot of it is like what you see in the United States with like labor unions and how they're represented by capitalist interests instead of the working class interest. You see that all the time, and that's one of the things I take for it. And you see all the breaking up of things and causing like class struggles to try to make them disappear or to make them like they're not here, so that like, you know, you subdue the working class. You know what I mean? Like, it's anti-labor. It's anti like stagnations of wages, which we see now. You know, increased militarization, which we see now. A lot of the things he said in these passages are things that are relating to our current conditions now, even before Trump, even when Biden was in. Biden did a bunch of fucking mass labor breakups, you know what I mean? Like the whole freaking, like what happened to the shoremen strike? What happened to them? They could have, something could have came out of that, but no, because they are completely infiltrated by the state to not want to move in a direction of class struggle or struggle to bring on liberation processes, you know? So, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
So yeah, I would like to give the critique on Discord after this is done.
Okay.
That's all I came up to say.
All right. History always repeats itself, and oppression just takes a new mask. Yeah, but there's some universalities in these things too. Some like patterns of behaviors that we can draw from the past and try to recognize these behaviors, these behavioral patterns and how they look and stuff like that. Like those can be starting. Could you please not interrupt me, please? Those can be starting points, and then we can work out to figuring out what is the new things that it's doing. What are the new conditions? All right, go ahead, Digley.
Yeah, I was just, and I do apologize for interrupting. But that's what Von Gotha was saying. Like, Von Gotha was saying that the oppression was the constant and the new mask was like what makes it different.
I was agreeing with them.
No, I know it.
Yeah, but yeah, like we gotta be ever vigilant with these things. We definitely gotta be vigilant. We definitely gotta like part of the objective reality is looking for pattern recognitions, because we got to see patterns and how things happen and what the results from these patterns and stuff like that, you know. But yeah, but does anybody else have any other questions before I close it off?
When you get done, before you feed Rufus, can you open the doors back up in the room?
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. Van Gogh, do you have any more questions or anything like that you would like to add into the comments before I close it down? Just to make sure. Anybody else has any questions or anything like that? Because this honestly like needs to be studied and redone. Like as much as I've like reread this and stuff, new things are popping up because of my development. But like remembering all those things, it's gonna take a bit for my brain to actually understand it a little bit more. You know what I mean? Because I need the process part. You know? Not of now, but thank you. No worries. No worries and stuff. All right then. Well, I'll close it down and I'll head to VC.